Welcome to our continuing series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. The Psychic Being, Part 9. From the Mother. The psychic being is formed by the inner truth and organized around it. Finding one's psychic being implies a kind of conviction, a faith in the existence of this psychic being. One must become aware of it, and then allow it to take up the direction of life and action. One must refer to it and make it one's guide. One becomes aware of the movements of one's being by referring more and more to the psychic being. Question: does the psychic being identify itself with the inner truth? Mother: it organizes itself around it and enters into contact with it. The psychic is moved by the truth. The truth is something eternally self-existent and dependent on nothing in time or space, whereas the psychic being is a being that grows, takes form, progresses, individualizes itself more and more. In this way, it becomes more and more capable of manifesting the truth. The eternal truth that is one and permanent. The psychic being is a progressive being, which means that the relation between the psychic being and the truth is a progressive one. It is not possible to become aware of one's psychic being without becoming aware at the same time of the inner truth. All those who have had this experience, not a mental experience, but an integral experience of contact with the psychic being, not a contact with the idea they have constructed of it, but a truly concrete contact, all say the same thing. From the very moment this contact takes place, one is absolutely conscious of the eternal truth within oneself, and one sees that it is the purpose of life and the guide of the world. One can't have one without the other. In fact, it is this that makes you realize that you are in contact with your psychic being. It may not be a conscious contact, but something that governs your life. Some people say there is something outside their own will that organizes their whole life, that puts them in the required condition, that attracts favorable circumstances or people, that arranges everything outside them, so to say. In their outer consciousness, perhaps they wanted something and worked for it, but something else came. Well, after some years, they realized that this is what really had to happen. You may know nothing of the existence of a psychic being within you, and yet be guided by it. For, in order to become aware of something, you must first of all admit that this thing exists. Some people don't. I have known people who had a genuine contact with their psychic being without knowing at all what it was, because there was nothing in them that corresponded to the knowledge of this contact. Question: can one be in contact with the eternal truth without having any contact with one's psychic being? Mother: some beings in the universe may have this direct contact with the eternal truth without any contact with the psychic being, because they don't have any psychic being. But in man, there is always a psychic being, and it is always through it that he comes into contact with the eternal truth. And this contact with the psychic being is usually disclosed to him in the same way, for it carries with it its own grace, its own splendor and beatitude. The psychic being is characteristic of man, and if one goes to the bottom of the matter, perhaps this is what gives man his superiority. Many of the old philosophies did not have a complete knowledge of the classification of the being. The psychic being, the inner truth, were not known to them. These systems had very simplistic notions, such as the outer and the inner consciousness, the waking and the sleep consciousness. They had no detailed knowledge of human psychology, or if they had one, they did not think it advisable to impart it to everybody. In former times, knowledge was not given to just anyone. A person first had to demonstrate his goodwill very clearly. He had to show sufficient capacities, a sufficient degree of development before he was taught certain kinds of knowledge. But now, in modern life, this knowledge is printed, and anyone can buy books and read them. And of course, you meet hundreds of people who have learned a lot of words without knowing anything of what they mean. At one time we had people here who claimed to have realized the supermind, but did not even know what it was. Question: do these beings who want to manifest themselves keep the same desire when they are born once again? Mother: no, it is not the same thing. It is not the whole being. It is the special faculty which remains in the earth atmosphere, does not leave it and go away, which remains in the earth atmosphere in order to continue manifesting itself. But the psychic being can very well return to the psychic world, and it is the psychic being which takes a body again. I explained to you the other day that before leaving the physical body, The psychic being decides most often what its next rebirth will be, the environment in which it will take birth, and what its occupation will be, because it needs a certain field for its experience. So it may happen that very big writers and very big musicians take birth another time in somebody quite imbecile. And you say, "What? It is not possible." Naturally, it does not always happen like that, but it may. There was a case in which the contrary happened. It was a violin player, the most wonderful of the century. Mother tries to remember. Just wait. I knew his name, and it is gone. It came back and is gone again. What was his name? Isai. He was a Belgian and a violinist. Truly, the most wonderful violinist of the epoch. Well, that man had most certainly in him a reincarnation of Beethoven. Not perhaps a reincarnation of his entire psychic being, but in any case, that of his musical capacity. He had the appearance, the head of Beethoven. I saw him, I heard him. I did not know him. I knew nothing. I was at a concert in Paris, and they were giving the concerto in D major. I saw him coming on the stage to play, and I said, "Strange, how much this man looks like Beethoven. He is the very portrait of Beethoven." Then it just started with a stroke of the bow, 3, 4 notes. Everything changed. The atmosphere was changed. All became absolutely wonderful. 3 notes started off with such power, such grandeur. So wonderful it was. Nothing stirred. All waited. And he played that from beginning to end in an absolutely unique manner, with an understanding I have not met with in any other executant. And then I saw that the musical genius of Beethoven was in him. But perhaps Beethoven's psychic being had taken a body in a shoemaker, or anybody else. One does not know. It wanted to have another kind of experience. For what I saw in this man was a formation belonging to an earthly plane. It was mental, vital, and as Beethoven had disciplined his whole mental, vital, and physical being around his musical capacity, that had remained in form. It was a living thing, and had incarnated in that man, just as it was, but not necessarily Beethoven's psychic being. In his former life, it was the psychic being of Beethoven that had shaped all those other beings, the psychic being that had disciplined them around musical creation. But after his death, it cannot at all be said whether the psychic being remained there. It must have returned to the psychic world as is the usual rule. That, however, had been formed, had its own life, independent and existing in itself. It was formed for a certain manifestation, and it remained to manifest itself. As soon as it found a fit instrument, it entered there to manifest itself.